This is Rocky Snyder. At the tone, leave your name and message and I'll get back to you.
If you would like to know more about starting a business in Boroondara, please contact our Economic Development staff or via the telephone interpreter service on 9278 4002.
Welcome to this episode of the Rockfit Files. I'm Rocky Snyder, and with me this week in the Anatomy in Motion series, exploring the flow motion model, is Australian osteopath Katie Wille. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Rocky. Great to be here.
All right, Katie, you've got a clinic in South Australia, in Melbourne, and you pronounce it how?
Boroondara Osteopathy.
Boroondara. All right, and what does that mean? I'm just out of curiosity. It's some Aboriginal word, I imagine.
It is. I've actually not looked it up, so I can't even answer that. It's actually the council region.
The Castle region. Okay.
The council is in the region of Melbourne.
Oh, the council.
Yeah.
I got you. Don't worry. We'll be having a translator in this podcast so you can understand all the words I'm saying and vice versa. No, seriously though, tell me about how it is that you came to be I guess a fellow colleague with Anatomy in Motion, and we'll get into the flow motion model in a little bit, but how did you get connected with all this?
Well, it came from something a bit out of left field for me. I actually didn't know anything about it. And I was trying to rent out a lease on my clinic shop. I was moving premises, and someone answered my advertisement and came to have a look at the shop. And he had a look, he thought it was all right. He was looking at the corridor thinking, yeah, I could get people to walk up and down here. I didn't know what he was on about. And so he left, and I was down at our holiday house at Phillip Island and decided to have a look at who this person was. I actually knew him a little bit from circles around. He's a myotherapist and he's in the Melbourne AIM crew as well. And so researching his bio, I came across a testimonial, and that testimonial had a person's name to it. And in Australia, myotherapists are allowed to post testimonials. And in that testimonial, this person had explained how he'd been able to help her in 1 or 2 treatments. And this girl was a lady I treated, and I knew I'd done everything I could. She had a really bad disc injury. She was only young. She was about 27. And I tried many different things, and probably over, if I have a look at the file, I'll be able to find out, but it was probably over a period of around 2 to 3 years, on and off. So she'd see the GP, she'd come back to me, things like that. And I'd refer her, after we tried lots of things, I referred her to Pilates, and that made some difference, like core stability stuff, just trying to help that area stabilize, if you like. And so she ended up leaving like my clinic because I got to the end of what I was capable of doing with her. And so having read this testimonial, I felt really quite confronted. I actually had this hot face panic sitting at the dining table at our holiday house. And so I started like probably panicking and going through his bio, just trying to find what I was missing. I kind of already had some feelings of missing things when you end up having to do the same sorts of manual therapy treatments on clients over a long period of time, and realizing that these people actually progress and become worse. Even though we're calling it maintenance treatment, things actually aren't being maintained. I think they're just slowed down in their crappiness, if you know what I mean. So I found that having had that feeling for a long time, this was quite, like I said, quite a confronting thing. So looking through his bio, I found he'd done a lot of things, but one of the things that was at the top was this Anatomy in Motion by Gary Ward. And having a look at jumping over to that website and checking that out, there was a book that I could order. And at that time in my life, with 2 really small kids, a business, everyone's lives get too busy. A book's a pretty easy thing to just go to and order. So we ordered the book. I got the book and started reading it. And that's actually where it all began, with someone trying to rent out my shop. So that it worked out in the end, which is brilliant. So yeah, that's
And
the
then
story.
not long after, I imagine there was a course coming to Melbourne.
Yeah, I think that was in about May that I got the book, and the course was in November. And I still wasn't sold on it. I actually took my husband and my mum trying to kick me up the butt to get out and go and do it because I was so interested. But, you know, when in that sort of space, you're sort of thinking, oh, it's a week out of clinic. Can I do that? Who's going to look after the kids? All of those sort of challenges were certainly blocking me doing it. But then in that sort of period between May and November, one of my other osteopaths, she read the book as well. And she's like, can I come with you? I kind of like the sound of this too. And I'm like, yeah, sure, let's do it together. So Elise, one of my osteopaths, came with me. And so it was great because the both of us had quite an experience with chronic pain in ourselves. So it was a really brilliant start to us working out our own bodies.
Is just side note, a lot of people get into manual therapy or movement therapies because of their own history. Is that what encouraged you into osteopathy?
Yeah, I was always interested in science anyway, and anatomy and physiology were definitely the big ticks for me. And yeah, I had masses of migraines ever since I was young. So I had a history of things, and that meant that I remember my first migraine when I was about 5 years old, and I was with an aunt and an uncle, and I ended up vomiting in a car park. And just so I remember those first ones that I had a couple of bad injuries. One was a fractured face off a trampoline, and my first problem, which has brought everything so much clearer for me, was hip dysplasia. So I never realized how impactful something like that could be. And I never realized, I mean, it's one of those things, you don't know what you don't know when you've never felt what you haven't moved. Like it's quite an extraordinary thing to go that far back.
And the hip dysplasia was as an infant, or did that occur after the fall? It was as an
No,
infant.
as an infant. Yeah. Yeah.
Fabulous.
So, yeah.
And I imagine that led into at least the facial injury with trampoline eventually led to craniosacral work. Am I right?
In terms of my own practice?
In terms of studying and your pursuit of knowledge. I mean, I'm just kind of guessing here, but do you do craniosacral work?
I do now, but I didn't do it at the start. I think one of the funny things in hindsight, it's strange how things actually happen. Like in osteopathy, we learned some wonderful things. I'm always grateful for the education I got in terms of the manual therapy side, and learning about anatomy and physiology, I think, has been fantastic. And the things about our profession, the principles, you know, the body is a unit, the body is self-healing, structure governs function. I remember sitting in those lectures in first year, and none of it made sense to me because my body didn't seem to heal. And I'd always been challenged by that. Like a lot of advertising for osteopathy talks about this holistic part, and I think they teach you some wonderful things, but I never felt like I got to that holistic part. We learn about every structure, absolutely, like all the structures. We learn about the mechanics of the structure, the muscles of the structure, you know, blood vessels, nerves, all of that, ligaments, everything. But in terms of tying one structure to another, that's the piece, in my opinion, that's missing. And that's definitely the piece that I got with the anatomy in motion. It tied all of my information together. And so I think osteopaths are brilliantly placed to benefit from this type of education because of the extensive study we do to just become osteopaths. And then I think you start, it's funny, there's a lot of structures since I've done anatomy in motion, since I've done the courses. A lot of this stuff that I got learned started being useful. But unless you have a purpose for something, you don't retain it as really good information for yourself.
Does
Because
anything kind of come to mind right now as an example? Can you think of anything? If not, no pressure, but I'm just wondering if you have something in mind.
a simple example is the foot bones. No one teaches you about the foot. Like, we learn what the foot bones are. And I remember learning supination and pronation in my studies. So we learn specific mechanics, but it didn't get to the opposition of tissues. And I remember learning it was a 3-plane motion, but looking back, my memory of it now, like of learning those things, was that it was full foot three-plane motions, not motions with opposition. And so that stuff, it was really good information. It just, in my opinion now, wasn't quite there. And that's definitely where, like, the understanding of the foot. Fortunately for me, I've always loved mobilizing. I've always been about loosening structures and working on muscle tissue. Like that was always probably 90% of what I did. And so mobilizing things, I think I kind of winged it a lot of the time. Now that I see, like, I worked on things because I could feel them and I could make sense of what was stiff and what wasn't. And I would loosen structures and mobilize things. And I think you end up, as osteopaths, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, of course. I can only speak for myself and my staff, because we have lots of these sorts of conversations. There's a bit of a everyone seems to have a similar feeling about what we've learned, because I've obviously, with other staff that are junior to me, I've mentored a few different people. And so, I mean, I'm well ahead of them in years. Like, I think the next one closest to me is 11 years younger. So there's sort of, it shows you what's coming out of university and the familiar feelings of not knowing certain things. And of course, people need experience, but the eye-opening situations that these other osteopaths have when we start teaching them about specific mechanics, the light bulb moments, all of those things that I felt in my course or courses that I've done with Gary and Chris. Like, it's wonderful to see that. And that's the bit that I think is missing in our education, is bringing it all back together. There's so much of this evidence-based medicine, which is really important. But I wonder if sometimes my passion is going back to the design. What's the design say? What does evolution tell us when we look at these structures? Because we're not smarter than evolution. We are lucky enough to be able to observe it. And so if we can bring it back to what does the structure say, because it'll tell you, then we might have something that we can then work on.
So there's a question that I should be posing more often now that you've been explaining this to me a little bit more, but I'm very curious to know this, is that initially, after coming back from the coursework, your very first course with your colleague and yourself, when you went back to clinic, how did you integrate that information into your practice? What did you find successful and what did you struggle with? And before that, did you actually integrate it right away or did you wait?
So back in 2016, they did that. The way they structured the course was 3 days, day off, then 3 days.
Yes.
And at that time in my life, I was just to give you an idea of why we implemented it. At that time, I was having about 5 to 6 migraines a week. So I was taking codeine maybe around 5 times a week, just to get myself, usually after lunch, just to get myself through the afternoon. So I went into that course with migraines and not wanting to sit on a floor. Like, I couldn't sit on floors because I would just get so sore. I hadn't been able to play with my kids really on the floor because if I sat there too long, I just stir myself up so badly. So we walked into that course, and as luck would have it, there was about 10 chairs. And far more than 10 people. So Elise and I definitely dived for the chairs each morning. It was pretty funny. We can see it in hindsight now, and also through the course. So because they did 3 days and then a day's break and then the 3 days. So I went back to work on the Wednesday, the day break in the middle. And I'd already in those 3 days completely changed how I was thinking about the body. It had already started sinking in that I was missing pieces. And so the simple answer to how did we integrate it clumsily is probably the best answer, because I walked back in and I remember trying to write my notes and I didn't know what to write anymore. Like I'd look at these people and I'd see a bigger picture and have no idea how to work it out. But I knew there was a bigger picture. And I think that's the thing you can't unsee. You can ignore it if you choose to, but you won't unsee it. It might seem like an overwhelming thing to keep studying, but you can't unsee it once you see it. So Chris, I think, or Gary, I can't remember which one, asked the question the next day, how did everyone go? Did anyone go into clinic? And I remember putting my hand up and going, I had no idea what I was doing. I've been working for 13 years one way. And then all of a sudden, I was like, I don't know, the first day of first year of osteopathy study, I had no idea what I was doing. It was so funny. So, then we did our other 3 days, and we just got so much out of it in terms of the mechanics. And I definitely didn't realize how big a path this was going to be, but it's actually excellent that it's a long path because you get so much out of it along the way. If it was only a couple of months worth of study, I don't know, this is the kind of education that ends up leading you down so many other paths because you start connecting the dots and you realize that as you know more, you realize how little you know because there is so much more. So you start seeing an even bigger picture, but it ends up not being overwhelming. It ends up being fantastic that you have all of this cool stuff you get to keep studying and keep filling in all the little gaps. And I loved that idea of the more I knew, the more I realized I knew hardly anything. And the good bit is you don't need to know everything either. You just need to keep looking and keep studying. And it ends up being an interesting thing, so interesting that you can't stop. I'm obsessed with my hips. I can't stop playing with my hips and finding hip motions and how on earth do you actually adduct a hip so that you feel it? But is the hip sitting in the right spot in the joint to actually experience it? And that's my latest sort of realization, is that my hips haven't been sitting centrated in the joint. So any motion I've been creating around them comes from the wrong spot in the first place to actually get the purity of the joint. So it's got down to these tiny little levels. So, and that's 4 years later, but coming out of the course and back into clinic, yeah, we were really clumsy, but we worked hard and we kept talking to each other. And that was a massive privilege for us to have, for Elise and I, to have each other to bounce off from the get-go.
Yeah, that's quite a gift, honestly, because
yeah.
For most of us, we come in as individuals, or at least I can speak for myself also, is that there was nobody around here. And at the time, we weren't doing Hangouts. We weren't doing anything necessarily online. It was just take the information back and see if you can just fumble along and stumble, and then just hope that you can hold on to a good deal of it before the next course that will stimulate more understanding and growth. And one thing that you said, I just thought of this analogy about anatomy in motion, the flow motion model being like a shopping cart at the grocery store, where you can pull things off the shelf as you go through life. And there's maybe acupuncture or manual therapy design, or there's exercise, and there's craniosacral therapy, and there's medical practitioners, and you can take all of this information and it just fits nicely into the cart, and you can continue to shop along, and no matter how many objects you place in that cart, there's always space for more. And that's just a nice way of how you brought that to my mind. So that was a gift, having Elise there with you. However, you didn't stop there. From the looks of your website, it looks that several of the people that you work with have gone through the coursework. And of course, you've had to share a lot of that information that you've learned with the staff that you have, so that they would understand what it is you were trying to express to them.
Yeah, I think we came out of it very enthusiastic, shall we say. So there were 2 staff that went and 2 staff that didn't. And the 2 staff that didn't thought we were bananas by the time we got back, because we were so excited. Like Elise had her chronic pain, I'd had mine. I came out of that course, I got to day 6. I could sit on a floor, which like was kind of weird for me, that I was okay. I told Gary at the end of the course, and he's like, what? Anyway, and we had dinner on the last night, and the funny thing about codeine and my body is it makes me feel very happy. And I get a little bit like it definitely has an effect on me. But after the course, I was sitting next to Chris. I said, you know what? The feeling I've got right now is like the feeling I get when I've taken codeine. Like I actually felt the same relaxed, nice feeling. And he turned to me and he goes, have you ever thought that the codeine was just giving you more of who you are? Like maybe it was relaxing me enough that I got to be a little bit more not the migraine, if that makes sense. And so it was a really clearly I've always remembered that it wasn't the codeine. The codeine just helped me get through. And I don't take any of that stuff anymore. It was never an issue in terms of, I know there's a huge addiction issue with it around the world. It never got to that sort of stage for me. I'm fortunately not into, like, I'm not an addictive sort of person to that sort of stuff. And so once I had no more migraines, I was just able to stop. And it did take time. It took about like maybe 8 to 9 months. So Elise and I entered back into the practice, and we just had to, we just played with it all the time. And with clients, I'm sure we were a bit clumsy with that at the start too, not knowing how far to go with it. And then trying to work out, it's taken us time to work out the expectations of the client when they enter the clinic room. And then working out if we can give them some sort of movement training to alter things. And at the start, there was some really good outcomes with people that, you know, those people that were on our maintenance style of treatment were actually getting better. And that didn't happen with another handful of people. And I'm very blessed that I have a couple of clients that have stuck at it with me from when I was clumsy with it or just inexperienced to when, you know, you keep getting your knowledge along the way. And those people were kind of like me. They were in a state of, what the hell am I going to do with myself? Because I'm in my 30s or my 50s or even my 20s, early 20s, one of the girls. And they've stuck at it with me for a long time just because they could see I was onto something, and they let me learn and let me go through the process with them. So I think that just comes from the trust side of people, that we've never ever said we can fix anything. It's just, I mean, it's not the right thing to create that sort of hope for people anyway. And it's not realistic, and we're not there for that. But what we could say to them is, here's something I've learned, and I can see this in your body. Would you like to try something else? Because I don't feel like the things we've been doing are going to be six. If it hasn't worked up till now, just can't see why it's going to work in the future. So we've been able to, over the time, I think as you get more clean with it, we've been able to implement things just even in our half-hour appointments. All our staff do that. So the other two staff that you were talking about that have now jumped on board with it, basically, I'd said to all of them, osteopathy is a really great job that has manual therapy has a really high rate of burnout. And part of that burnout, in my opinion, is it's really hard to have people come back all the time saying, why is this not getting better? Or having it go to the next thing. Okay, my knee was bad, but why is my shoulder now this bad? Or how come my neck doesn't move? I'm falling apart. And then feeling like your only avenue is referring to an orthopedic or a rheumatologist or doing exercise training, which has a really good basis to it. But when you stop, the problem comes back again. And that was my experience with like Pilates. Yeah, it would help my headaches, no doubt. I felt better for it. But why, when you stop, does it all come back? So how do we get away from needing the outside things? How do we find the resources in our own body with all those osteopathic principles of the body is a unit, the body has self-healing mechanisms, structure governs function? How do we get back to that basic principle that I feel does hold true today? And it's such a nice feeling to believe in your profession again. So it's been a big, it's been great actually watching the other staff take it on and watch them grow with it and realize that they are less likely to burn out in their profession, that they have longevity in their profession, that they're not pummeling away at people for 8 hours a day, hurting their own bodies, because we have other ways that seem to get to the root cause of stuff first.
Yeah, that's the nice thing, especially integrating in some type of movement with your patients or clients, because as you're doing manual techniques on them, it's not that you're necessarily teaching them those techniques in which they can perform on themselves. So in essence, you are responsible in some regards for what they're receiving, and they just lay there and receive that gift in which you're giving. And so in a very low level consciousness, they are putting their trust as well as their faith and their responsibility upon your shoulders. So to actually give them something and teach them and guide them perhaps into movements that can bring them to another level of function, movement, and less pain and so on. What I saw with many of my fellow students in this area going through the coursework who were manual therapists is that was quite a struggle for them, because they were not accustomed to actually presenting people with movements. And it wasn't an expectation of the people coming in to see them. So there was a number of things that they had to overcome. One was meeting or presenting a new expectation for the people that saw them, to say that, yes, you'll be lying on the couch or the table or what we call it, and you'll be receiving this work, but here is your homework too. Did you run into that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It was tricky at the start, and there was definitely people that rejected what we were doing, and that's okay. Like, we still had to offer it. You got to have a go. And funnily enough, those people have actually come back anyway, because they want to try something new. But and some of them, like, I've had conversations with people. I'm so glad I had such a chronic pain issue for so long. And because it gives you such a good insight to the fear that people have when they start to move. So some of that comes out of, I think, the fear that they're going to make themselves worse. And then we just got really strategic in a positive way, if you say that, that we would do the movement therapy. I always do movement therapy now before I do any manual therapy, and I still use manual therapy. It's a fantastic tool. It's a great addition to this stuff. And pretty much I would say 90% of my appointments, I end up doing some manual therapy. The first appointment I ever did that I didn't do manual, like nothing. I just sat on the floor. It was so weird. Like just working with someone for an hour on movement, not touching them was just bizarre to me. But now we do, my routine is to do movement therapy first, because I want the person to know that it's not what we do on the table that has the impact. That if we can get their central nervous system to understand what's going on and to feed it new inputs and give them options, that what we do on the table is actually just complementing that. And there's still people that you just sneak it in. It's very easy to sneak in. You can do, you know, a really quick screen and then turn it into a very quick exercise and do a majority of treatment on a table, because some people are just not going to, if you give them something small, they're more likely to have a go. And they're more likely to have a go at that something small if you do the work on the table, but you can use the movement therapy to decide what you're going to do. So I find that like a great screening tool in terms of how I'm going to use my manual therapy, and then give them a really little exercise. And it works really well. Some people aren't prepared to put in the, you know, they don't want to come time after time to keep learning this stuff. But so we just do it in little chunks along the way. I think you just got to fit in with the client.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. So now that wasn't just the first workshop. I mean, every time that Gary and Chris would come to Melbourne, I have a feeling that you were in the audience and you were retaking some of the coursework. So have you taken it more than one time?
I've done 4 of them.
Excellent.
So I didn't know it was like, I hadn't rented my shop out yet, so I didn't know about the first one.
But I'm curious then, because for those that have only taken it once, that happen to be listening to this, or perhaps those people that haven't taken the coursework and maybe just taken some online and are interested in more, why? Why is it that you would go back to the same course, which is for the most part telling identical information? What was it, and what did you get out of going back every time? I've got my own answer, but I would love to hear yours.
Well, there's definitely one part of it, and Rob Sawyer put this perfectly well once. It's health camp. It's like a lovely space to sit in with people that understand the way you see the body, or at least have a relatedness in that way. And that's a really fun space to sit in. Secondly, we really knew after that first course that we were struggling with things. There were many holes, and Elise didn't do the second one that I went to, but she's done the 2 after that. So I went on my own the second time, and it was really nice to sit there and not try and scribble down everything, that you could sit there and you had the background information, that you could sit and listen rather than sit. I mean, rather than sitting and learning, it was more cementing ideas and just filling in those little pieces without the frantic trying to take notes and understand from the very beginning. So it was I remember going back going, oh, Elise, it was so much more relaxed this time. I could sit there and just listen and take a few notes. I didn't have to, you know, it wasn't so intense. So it was quite lovely to do. And then the third one, same sort of thing. It's just nice to sit in a room with people and keep learning about the same stuff. I think the moment, if you think you've got everything, it's it's a bit of a shame because there's so much more to learn. And it's a bit of that, you don't know what you don't know. And until you hear it again, you're still going to miss it. So we were lucky with our 4th course that I did, that it was the AIM revisitors. So we got 4 days of people in a room that had done the course before, which I think was the one that got cut off in California. So that was a really different experience again, because everyone kind of knew each other, or mostly, and had another different feel and another level to it. So I think taking extra courses on a thing that you've already started studying, it just, if you enjoy that topic so much that you're thinking about it, then I think you'll enjoy it more than you realize, because you're not going to sit there frantically trying to understand. You're going to sit there and cement ideas for yourself.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I cannot absorb 100% of the information through one go round, and nor can I'm lucky if I get 20%. So I'm a very slow learner, and it takes a lot to get through. And so I just have to keep repeating it until I get a grasp of what's being done. Now, to those in your field, the other osteopaths that might be listening too, how did you benefit from this? How did it make your practice more effective, more complete? Did it fill in places that it sounded like there was missing parts? You had already mentioned that, but what were the missing parts, I guess? Can we explore that a little bit? Because I'm sure there's a whole bunch of your colleagues that could benefit from understanding the joint mechanics of the gait cycle. So what would you have to say about that?
The missing parts, one of the biggest is satisfaction professionally.
Really?
Yeah, I think I was burnt out as well. I think with the scenario of the chronic pain and running a business and the kids, and like it's a big job to then try and, you know, help people out of their predicaments. I think professionally, I think that's part of the burnout thing. I think we learned some amazing stuff at uni. I think, like I said, the techniques we learn, I use every day. I just, that missing piece was, how do we link it all together? And we're taught to take histories. We're taught to look at all different areas. Say someone comes in with a neck problem, we're taught to check the arm, we're taught to check the neck, the rib cage, all of these things. But it's almost like, for what? I get that it's for tightness and stiffness, but what am I looking for? Like, what are the specific things I'm actually looking for? Like, if someone's arm is internally rotated at the shoulder joint, what does that even mean? Like, and if
So you're looking for the why. You're looking for the why is that.
Yeah, but without a process to find that, in my practice, I probably just ignored it, because if you don't have a way to manage it, or you're not sure what to do with it, it's going to be a very tricky. You need a purpose for things. You need a purpose as to why you're looking. And that's what the flow motion model gives you, is that it puts each part in a moment in time in each of its actions, so that you understand how this body integrates in a pattern, rather than, I've got a sore neck. Well, why have you got a sore neck? Did you hurt your neck? No, I didn't hurt my neck, but gee, it's sore. Cool. What did you hurt? Because then we can look for, okay, you hurt your hip. How did you hurt your hip? Oh, I tore a muscle. Oh, okay, now we've got something. Now we can go and have a look at why they tore the muscle. I've had heaps of ankle sprains. Oh, really? That's interesting. So you probably don't have very good foot mechanics in that ankle, but how is that related to the neck? And if that's the only thing in their history, I, prior to doing this education, had zero chance of actually piecing that together. And it sounds like a long bow to a lot of people. Like it sounds like a really, really long path. How on earth do you get from an ankle sprain to a sore neck? It sounds ridiculous. And it would have to me as well. But I don't think it's ridiculous because I can see how the joints connect together and why that neck is trying to turn one way, a long way, trying to increase some movement somewhere. We just have to find out what it's trying to make up for. So that's the bit that is the big piece that was missing for me. Scenarios like that, and why someone.
What about contradictions to your field? For instance, in strength conditioning, there would be some movements as simple as the knee path when performing a lunging action, where for years you're told to allow the knee to travel over the midfoot toward the second toe and all that. And then we're coming back to learn that pronation actually takes the knee in deeper and it needs to go there and so on. Were there things that you brought back that were in direct or indirect contradiction with what you were practicing?
I think one of the things I always had in my head was mobility. I hadn't gone so far down the strength path. Like even if I look at my old exercise sheets, nearly everything is about mobility. I guess the one thing that I could say that's come to mind is the stretching. Are we stretching muscles that are already lengthened? That's probably one of those parts that if there's a tight muscle, no matter whether it's short or long, pretty much everyone seems to go, oh, that's tight, let's stretch it. So stretching that muscle is lengthening it. But what if that muscle was already long? I mean, an obvious one is let's say a levator scap or something like that. The person's head tilts away from that side and that muscle's always tight, so they keep stretching that muscle away. So it does give you some relief. I actually wrote this in an Instagram post the other day, but it does give you some relief. But the problem will come back. It's the same with the pec muscle stuff. You know, you can have short pecs and yeah, you can stretch them and open them. But if you don't change the parameters that muscle works within, which is the joint mechanics, that muscle will have to return to the state that it was in prior to you stretching it. So that's definitely the thing, because I was always into stretching. It was helpful for my migraines to stretch my levator scap, my pecs and my traps. And I would do that like so many times. And it was a very strong routine for me that I just kept resorting to because you run out of strategies. And I don't have to do that anymore. Like I sometimes stretch my pecs if I've done a little bit of something, you know, and it's like, oh, geez, I could do with a bit of a stretch. So be it. But I'm not relying. I think it's the part where I used to rely on those sorts of things to help clients stay well, or in the, you know, stay well, like kind of well, but they couldn't get past the problem. So the mobility, I'm not sure if I'm being so clear, but the mobility part was always there for me. But yeah, the stretching, it definitely challenged all of the things that I've done with stretching, absolutely. And that I could look closer at the joint mechanics instead and see why that muscle needed to be continually stretched.
And just out of curiosity, is the issue of the levator, the pec, and so on, was it related to your hip dysplasia?
I reckon. It seems like my brain was related to my hip dysplasia. I feel like as I got my hips moving, it's like my brain started moving. It's funny with this joint mechanics stuff, the flow-on effects that you don't expect. But if you pay attention.
I was just curious, you know, that first course and how you're exploring the different phases and so on and working into proper hip mechanics, if that was what started to relax or release and allow you to feel like you could sit on the floor, and that codeine like response. Just
Well,
but
it's a bit bigger than that. I had a short leg, and I had worn a heel lift
I've
for
got
20.
two of those. That's amazing. That's great.
Hopefully they're the same length, Rocky.
Yeah, I think. I don't know.
So I wore a heel lift for 20 years. So from when I was 16 to 36, when I went to do this course, I don't know what day it was, but I still had that heel lift, and I had Velcro dots on my thongs, flip flops. I had Velcro dots that I would Velcro this thing on. And since I was about 20, when that heel lift wasn't there, I knew for a weird feeling in my face, like I get this strange feeling over my lip. And I only connected it once shopping with some girlfriends. I'm like, I always felt like I needed to stretch the side of my face. It was really bizarre. I never told anyone because everyone would think you're nuts. Anyway, so I just kept it to myself for a long time, but I always knew that that was the thing that that was the trigger to go, oh crap, I forgot to put my heel lift in. Anyway, so about day 3, I think it was, or 4, I don't know. I said to Elise, we were going out to have lunch, and I said, oh, I don't know about this heel lift thing. And so I took it out and I never put it back in. And so I walked around on this leg that was about, like, if I sat on the floor, is about 2 centimeters short. And it had always been validated that it was from the hip dysplasia. So, you just kind of accept it. You go, oh, okay, hip dysplasia, whatever. And so what we noticed on that course is that I could do, so having the five sort of exercises or phase patterns that we would do, I could do it on one side and my bloody leg would lengthen and it would sit even. But if I did it on the other side, it would shorten. So there was this funny little pattern going on. And it was kind of fun. I thought it was hilarious at the start. But unfortunately, what it meant was that every time it shortened, I'd get this facial pattern and then it would start irritating a migraine. So I started seeing these very clear links, and that went on. I still had that short leg for about 7 or 9 months after the course, up, down, migraine, face, all of this stuff. It took that long to find the settling motion and to find the balance for that leg. And it's I don't think it's gone back since. So it took work. And that's the thing with bodies, is if things happen when you're super young, by the time you get to 36, you might be a bit screwed up. If it only happens when you're 25, you might get to 56 and feel screwed up. It's like that sort of time delay. And if it happens earlier, you experience the stuff earlier. That's my sort of feeling on that.
Well said. So I'm also curious about the other professions in the Melbourne area, such as medical doctors, chiropractors, acupuncturists for that matter. Do you have a network with those other professionals, and are they aware of the work that you do and how you integrate the flow motion model into it?
Yeah, certainly not specifically about the flow motion model. And it's a funny thing in Melbourne. You can have some really good relationships with people, but they're definitely hard to build. So we have a few people that have jumped on board what we do and can see what we're doing and give us some referrals, like some podiatrists. So when they sort of feel like they're hitting a bit of I'm not sure, they'll ask us questions. And I've also got a dentist that kind of can see what we're doing craniosacrally with people. So that, and because it's one of those things that I can't separate out any technique from the flow motion model. It's like the world is flow motion model and everything else kind of reads from that model. So all techniques come from, all ideas and observations come from there. In terms of GPs, not really. Like it's really I find it really hard to get it across. And we do 170 GP newsletters every month on a different topic, and we just choose how we word things. So, and we do that with we have it of recent times with our Melbourne lockdown. You know, that people haven't even been at work half the time. So, but like we send out 300 newsletters every month to different groups. So we've got podiatry, personal trainer type people, GPs, and yeah, the like of those sorts of professions, to just introduce little concepts along the way. So rather than saying we can do all of this, we're just trying to get people to think about if we can give them a rational thought process or explanation of an injury, of a syndrome, of a, you know, thing like that, maybe we'll get somewhere. So trying to go from a place that they know and bring it back to a place that we feel we understand.
Yeah, I can relate with the medical profession, and I think partly because of how they're educated and the reinforcement of pharmaceuticals to alleviate a lot of the symptoms that people come and see them with, rather than a movement-based approach. So that's slow in the making around here as well. But it looks like, unfortunately, we're kind of coming up to the end of our time here. This has flown by faster than I was even expecting. I knew that anytime I talk with somebody about anatomy and motion and their work, it just flows by. But this has really been a torrent down the stream with you, and I really appreciate it. So if people wanted to, this is the time to kind of to give your information out. If people wanted to find out more about your clinic, and again, I'm not going to pronounce it because you do a much better job of it. And Boroondara is the closest I can get to. Is that, yeah? Did I get it right? Yeah. All right. And Katie Wille, how do we find out more? Where are the websites? Of course, we'll post these descriptions below, but if you could just say it to the listening audience.
Yeah, sure. Our website is www.burundaraosteopathy.com.au. It's a bit of a long one. But we also have a couple of, so I have an Instagram profile also called The Body Mechanics Nerd. And my colleague Elise has one that's called I Am Elise Fuller. So there's a couple of us doing some things, just spread the word of different information. And part of that is just to get it out of our own brains and out there, rather than feeling like you're keeping everything in your head. So yeah, that's how you can find us.
Do you do services online of any sort, or do you do any counsel coaching?
Very limited. We mostly do in-house stuff. I do a little bit. It's definitely got more challenges than doing an in-house when you're a manual therapist trying to assess. But yeah, we do a small amount of that. But the majority of our work is an in-house service, especially now that we're allowed to have people back in clinic again. Yeah.
Oh, and that's a nice thing. So I wish you well getting people back into that clinic and helping as many as possible. If you'd like to find out more information about the flow motion model, anatomy and motion courses, or Gary Ward himself, pick up a copy of his book, What the Foot, at findingcenter.co.uk. And while you're at it, pick up a copy of my book, Return to Center, where I take the flow motion model and apply it to strength training and conditioning. You can get a copy of that at rockysnyder.com. Thanks for listening.